今年我们就那个西武会
So a
议
journey
当
to the
中
West,
降到
the
第二
second
站
stop,
第二站的第一
and
天呢
the first day
法
of
王
the
在那
second
个
stop,
他
Ponsokor
们的教
Rinpoche
堂当中
arrived
就是讲到
and then gave the
这
teaching
个佛教的博大精深，这里面有
in
各种
a
各样的人
church on
然
the
后这个
topic
博大
of
精深分为两个方
the
面，一个是完美的
compassion
行
in
为
Buddhism.
这
And in
行为
terms
是
of
我们经
compassion
常
in
讲那
Buddhism,
个
he
心菩提心的
talks
是六种
about
关系
the
所以是这样的六
practical,
种
the
然
aspirational
后完
bodhicitta
美的
and
思
the
想上就
practical
是下面也会
bodhicitta.
讲这个
He
善心
then first talks
这个
about
行
the
为当中昨
conduct,
天就
the
讲了
perfect
是吧
conduct
这个
in
布施
Buddhism.
就
And
是
yesterday
六
we
度里面
talked
的布
about
施已经讲了
the generosity
第二
out
呢
of
就是
six
持戒就
paramitas.
是佛教
And then the
戒
second
律呢有
aspect
三
is
就是分别
discipline.
是别戒、多
In
戒、菩
terms
萨戒、
of
为正戒
discipline, there are three
就是
types
这
of
个
discipline
别
in
戒、多戒、
Buddhism:
僧闻
the
戒呢
vows
就
of
是首先是
pratimoksha, the
要杜绝
bodhisattva
这
vow,
个
and
杀
then
生
samaya
等
vow of
害怕
sacred
的事情
mantrayana.
菩萨
The
戒呢就是尽
pratimoksha
可
vow
能
requires
自己
one to
或者
abstain
间接
from
帮
harming
助
others,
众生
such as killing.
尽可能
In
的救
addition,
护
the
他从
bodhisattva
免
vow
受这个
requires one to benefit
伤
others
害
directly
就
or
是这个是
indirectly and to
菩
save
萨戒
others from
那这个
suffering
弥增戒
with
是
one's
什么样
best
呢
efforts.
如此修行
Being
之后呢
trained
一
in
旦
this
就
way,
是有了
once
三遍
the
的禅
practitioner
定
achieves
得到自在
unobstructed
的滋润
meditative
每一天都会
absorption
就是
and
利益疏益
miraculous
人
power,
疏
he or
益
she
的
can
众生
spontaneously
我们
benefit
肯
billions
定
of
会有这
sentient
么一
beings
刻
every
有这
day.
么一个时刻
The
那么这就
samaya of
是
sacred
快速的
Mahayana
成长
also
放大
involves
于他
swiftly
这个弥正
accomplishing
戒
vast
弥正戒的
activities
这样的方式
for
呢
the
就是
welfare
是这
of
样
all
来讲
sentient
的
beings.
就
This
是意
is
思就是说
how Ponsokor Rinpoche
对
expounded
就是
on
这个
the
不用
three
解释吧大家应该知道
disciplines.
那
It is
这个安
certainly
忍
that
第三
every
个
one
安
of you
忍是
can
什么
reach
呢？就
this
是遵
stage.
循佛陀所说的
In
就是
terms of
自
the
净
third
其
one,
意
which is
不
patience,
扰乱别人的心
following the Buddhist
尽可
teachings
能的
on
疏忽自己的
purifying
心
your
这
own
就是
mind,
根
you
本
should
的
never
就是
disturb
说
others' mind,
这
but
个
focus only
不
on
涉及
taming
到
your
无
own
扰他
mind.
心其实在这里也讲的比较
This
清
is
楚
really
还有呢就是不
the
要说这个伤害别
explanation
人
of
的
do
话
not
不要呢就是做伤害别
do
人的
not
事
disturb
就
others'
以免
path and
就
do
是
not
扰乱
disturb
别
your
人的
own
心
mind.
就是
This
不
is the
扰
root
别
practice
人
in
的心的
Buddhism.
话呢就是不
Certainly,
做
you
不
should
少
not
这
speak
其实我们
unkind words to
有些人
or
可能只
do
一言
unkind
下去就是
things
你没有
to
故意就是
the
说别人
others.
的
Just
这个
observe
坏
your
话的
own
话呢
mind
已经
and
构
rid
成了就
yourself
是别
of
人的这
any
种这个
negative
伤心的
or
事情
malicious
那你也
mental
没有
state,
做这
such
个
as
别人这
anger
个伤心的事的
directed
话呢
towards
就是硬
others.
编成的
Even
这样
if you
这
were
个可
not
能是
to
前世的
having
业
done
力一般来
anything
讲
to
的
the
话呢
others,
说
but
了
if
这
you
个
were to
菩萨
speak
戒的人
unkind
呢尽
words
量的就
to
是
the
不扰乱
others,
别人的心
it is still
观察自
disturbing
己
the
的
minds
心
of
在这个基
others.
础上呢就是端出嗔恨他
Sometimes
人
it
的
is
这个
because of
恶行代
karma,
替就是这个
but
是
we
很
should
重要
try not to do that
第
as
四呢
someone
就
who
是
had
精进
already
度所
taken
谓
the
的精进就
Bodhisattva
是
vow.
一类于
In
这个
terms of
行善
diligence,
善呢就是
diligence
欢
means
喜
to
无害积极的
joyfully
行
engage
什
in
么是
virtuous
这个
activities and
精进与无害
practices,
精
and
神
more
积极的行为
specifically
呢
to
也就
take
是说
pleasure
慈悲
in
心呢
maintaining
就是其中
tranquil
悲心呢
and
其
caring
中悲心
behavior.
呢
How
是
do you
指的
do
平
that?
时
It
看
is
到身体有
through
病呢或者
cultivating
说
loving
内心有
kindness
不
and
幸的
compassion
这些
towards
众生
others.
要生气
Compassion
啊
means,
就是
for
远离这
instance,
些众
when
生
we
远离
see
这些痛
someone
苦
who suffers
容
from
不
a
好就
physical
是这样的
illness or
善心呢就
undergoes
是叫
any
做是悲
heartbreaking
心
misfortune,
那我们
we
经
think
常
that
也是
may
有
they
看
be
到
free from
精神
all
不正
kinds
常
of
的身体
sufferings.
不正
Loving
就是这
kindness
个不
means to
健
hold
康的
an attitude
或者
such
呢
as
就是
thinking
有
how
些众
wonderful
生遇
it
到
would
困
be
难痛苦
if
的时
all
候尽
sentient
量去
beings
安
would
慰
always
私心呢就
enjoy
是
peace
是
and
怀有
happiness.
这个
So when it
众生觉
comes
得能
to
拥有安乐的话安乐的话
when
呢
it
多
comes
好
to
就是这
compassion,
样的心态那
if
么
we
这个
were
安
to
乐
see
呢就
people
是暂
suffering
时的
from
安乐
mental
是指
illness
的
or
是这
from
个常
any
数
kinds
无
of
比时
suffering,
永后
we
法
think
美
that
丽原
may
样
they be free from
希
all
望
kinds
所
of
有的
suffering.
众生有这样
And
的
then temporary
需
peace
要
and
就是
happiness refers
培育
to
这样的这
longevity,
种
good
善心
health,
就是这里
abundant
面就是没有
possessions,
说
widespread
具体的
fame,
这
and
个
so on in
安
this
乐吧就
ordinary
是像
world.
战士来
Yet
讲让
you
众生获得
sincerely
了
wish wish that the sentient beings would enjoy all these types of happiness. This wish needs to be further cultivated through gradual practice and ultimately cultivated the prayer that all beings may attain the utmost bliss and happiness in the Pure Land of Sukhavati the moment they pass away. What you experience in the Pure Land is beyond description, since any type of happiness in this mundane world cannot compare with it. Therefore, maintaining this motivation, you need to diligently learn to practice the method of directing yourself and others to take rebirth in Sukhavati. By wishing others to enjoy all kinds of happiness, which is the mind of loving kindness, is to wish them well, to wish them to have all kinds of happiness. And the best kinds of happiness and bliss is in the Pure Land of Sukhavati. So for those of you who wish to be reborn to Sukhavati, in the East, Khenpo Sodargye would speak of encouraging others to make aspiration to chant 400,000 times of the Amitabha mantra or 1 million times of Amitabha mantra and so on. But since in the West, people may not be able to accept that method, Ponzo Rinpoche did not speak of that. The method of taking rebirth in Sukhavati are to pray to the Buddha, practicing Dharma, and serve the Sangha with respect. If you can perform those wholesome deeds in regard to the three jewels, you will be much happier in old age. The reason is that through these practices, you will soon be reborn in Sukhavati and enjoy happiness hundreds of thousands times greater than whatever was experienced in this world. Therefore, incomparable joy will be felt. Generally speaking, for most of us, death is approaching as we age, and as a result, we feel more pain in both the body and the mind. However, for those who engage diligently in Sukhavati practice, they will not have a fear of death, but rather be much readier for the transition when the time comes. As Buddha told us, these practitioners aspiring for taking rebirth in Sukhavati will be at peace when their lives come to an end. Why is that? Just like a severely sick person would be overjoyed when recovering fully from sickness. A person who is able to be reborn in a pure land will be completely rid of himself or herself of suffering in samsara. Such is the unique outcome that only Buddhist tradition can provide. Now, an ordinary person would be ecstatic if he became the world's richest man tomorrow, whereas the bliss and happiness attained from liberation is hundreds of thousands of times greater than that. That is why Sukhavati practitioners becomes more and more joyful as this life approaches to the end. Well, I think whenever we have Dharma teachers to travel abroad and to travel to different places to propagate Dharma, these kinds of methods that's used by Ponzo Rinpoche, the skillful means that's used by Ponzo Rinpoche is something that we really need to learn. We first of all need to comply with the religion, to comply with the customs and the living habitual tendencies of the others, and then also expound whatever that we hold as a principle. So I think Ponzo Rinpoche indeed teaches really well, and we need to learn from this particular way of expounding Dharma. This is obviously in our daily life. All excellent Dharma practitioners enjoy more happiness and ease as they got older, while most ordinary people become more distressed in the face of aging. While ordinary people, when they lost their teeth and when they have more gray hair and when their body ages and declines, they would feel much sad. But the senior practitioners or practitioners get old, they would get happier, they would get more at ease. Unlike the ordinary people who would get more anxious with aging, they get happier with aging. The difference between the two tells us of the qualities of Buddha Dharma. This is because of the merit and qualities of the Buddha Dharma that the senior people in Tibet, for example, have no fear towards death. An old practitioner, old monastic that I knew, he's a Galupa. He received a great number of Mahāti and Nima teachings from Khenpo Lakshé, and he practiced in monastery all through his life. And one day, in his dream, he saw Khenpo Lakshé, and then Khenpo Lakshé said that it's time for you to come to meet me. And then this old monastic went to Gachi Lama, who is a Nimapa monastic, and then told him that, well, I dreamt of Khenpo Lakshé, and then I think I'm not going to stay in this world for a long time. Can you go with me to the old cave that we used to receive Dharma teachings? And then he took care of all of his belongings belongings and made them as offering to everything. And then he told his monastery, said that he's going, and then just within a few days he passed away. There are people at time of death, as practitioners at time of death, they would be able to foresee the date of death and then would be able to pass away rather peacefully. Some may wonder over here, is it possible for an ordinary person to be reborn in the Pure Land of Sukhavati? The answer is yes, without a doubt. If you can spend half the effort and hard work that you would put into your worldly life you practicing the Dharma, and in particular never forget praying to the three jewels, I promise that you will be successful to be reborn in Sukhavati. In the practice of diligence, Panzogam Rinpoche expounded the teaching of to be reborn in Sukhavati. And then the fifth one is meditative concentration. Meditative concentration is to single-pointedly pray to the Buddha, practicing the Dharma, and show respect to the Sangha without any distraction. As such, diligently and constantly engage in spiritual practice. The way of meditation varies among different religions, including Christianity, Islam, and Buddhism. According to the view of Buddhism, the essential point of meditation is to settle the mind in single-pointed concentration. Well, if we can think of Shakyamuni Buddha at all times and under all circumstances, that would be the perfect practice of meditative concentration. The other day when I was rereading this part, and I thought this is such a great instruction, if we can think of Shakyamuni Buddha or our Lama at all times and under all circumstances, that would be considered as the practice of meditative concentration. Sixth one is wisdom. Wisdom is to realize how to abandon non-virtue and engage in virtue. To cultivate such wisdom, we need to first listen to Dharma teachings in the presence of a qualified teacher and then contemplate the meaning in order to dispel doubts. Finally, we must blend these teachings with the mind and put them into actual practice through meditation. Through this process, we will develop a firm conviction in the truthfulness of the Dharma. If we can deepen the wisdom of contemplation and wisdom of meditation, it will become easier to understand the advanced scientific knowledge. Although many religions in this world cannot keep up with the pace of science and remain consistent with the view of science, Buddhism can nevertheless coexist with the science and support its development. Indeed, many different religions, their ideas cannot be supported by the science. However, when it comes to Buddha Dharma, it can coexist with the science and support. Albert Einstein had stated that very clearly, where he said that religion, Buddhism and science can coexist. Well, we quoted that very often from whichever aspect, the micro or macro world, all the way till now, the 21st century. In fact, lots of the teachings within science, including that of the human body, of the cosmic world, we still are able to find the answers of them within the teachings of Buddhism. As you learn the Buddha Dharma, the discoveries and theories of science will very likely resonate with you in the same manner that you broaden your language of science from different dimensions. A conviction in Buddhism can readily arise in your mind. So maybe the theory of relativity of Albert Einstein and quantum physics and so on, the more we look into science, the more we will be able to feel more conviction in Buddhism teachings. If we go deeper into Buddha Dharma, it will be clear that there are similar descriptions in Buddhist scriptures on the mysteries of science that puzzled many people, and that the Buddha has already addressed the hidden meaning and rules that have been or have not been discovered by scientists. The previous president of Technology University of China, Professor Zhu Qingshi, he once said that the scientists strive so hard to reach to the answers. That is where the Buddhist masters await for a long time prior to the scientists' arrival. He wrote that, and later on, when I had an opportunity, I specifically interviewed him in Shanghai. I interviewed him a few times. That was the first time I interviewed him, and I asked him, as a scientist, because he had been a scientist and a president of the university for many years, that university is indeed quite prestigious in terms of technology and scientific research. And then I asked him, as a scientist, why would you say that? What was the logic behind your such kind of proclaim? He then slowly explained that Master Lan Huaijing, he studied under Master Lan Huaijing for many years. He studied the Shangama Sutra and so on. And then he realized that whatever kinds of science or physics from whatever kinds of different aspects, the more he realized, the more he studied Buddhism, the more he realized that science is simply catching up with Buddhism. Nowadays, we live in this era where science and Buddhism are flourishing. So I asked many people, both abroad and domestically, educators and scientists and so on. I think those kinds of interviews would be very meaningful. Those interviews and speeches, conversations are included in the collection of the speeches given at universities. I believe there are over 20 books and maybe 29, 30. Various kinds of professors received my interview, though I'm not a professional journalist. I don't have such qualification, but I simply interviewed them as an ordinary Tibetan. Other than some sensitive issues, I asked different questions such as Buddhism and science and so on. And sometimes I think it would be really interesting that our common ground is not based on what Buddhism taught, rather what the scientists also acknowledge. When we look at science, the science develops every day, and there are probably people feeling that look at the scientific development and all kinds of advancement of technology, but how could you Buddhists still study and research in the teachings that's given 2,500 years ago? There may be people thinking in such a way, but when you look at those interviews with the scientists and those thinkers abroad and domestic, such as Professor Penzong Guang, as well as professors from Europe and United States and so on, you will definitely be able to see how those kinds of analysis and discussions had already taken place. And it is not just that we're complacent with whatever we've studied. Then Phuntsok Rinpoche continued, it is worthwhile for any of those who want to better themselves in regard to material possessions or spiritual wealth to study and practice Buddhism, and they will soon find themselves greatly benefited from the Dharma. I am sure such a benefit can be verified by everyone's personal experience. Well, other than that, I don't have too much time to expound on this topic. Now in the land of Tibet, there exist of both Khenpo and Hangul, the total of which are more than 300 volumes. In terms of each volume, there consist of 400 to 500 volumes. A few dozens of pages do not count as volumes, rather 400 to 500. You may refer them for a more detailed exposition on the perfect conduct in Buddhism. Okay, so let's stop here today.